On this, the 111th episode of What the Ship, we look at the top 5 news stories as of October 21st, 2024. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So my apologies for not getting this video out sooner. Been a little bit under the weather, so I've been kind of coughing and hacking here a bit, so I didn't want to do a video with it. I still may do it here. But I want to go over the top 5 stories. I was going to put these together, some of them into smaller, separate videos. But with all of everything going on, it would be easier just to jam it together into one episode of What the Ship. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Our first story takes us to the high north, and it deals with the Russian shadow fleet as it stalls, leaving 1 million cubic meters of liquefied natural gas undelivered. We'll be talking a lot about natural and liquefied petroleum gas in this episode. This story from Malt Humpert, as Russia's attempts to establish an LNG shadow fleet enters its third month, undelivered cargoes continue to stack up aboard LNG carriers and floating storage units. What we're seeing here is mounting evidence that Russia is assembling all the pieces for a potential LNG dark fleet. Now, what do we mean by a dark fleet? Well, great piece over in Lloyd's List by good friend Greg Miller, who talks about the creation of a parallel fleet. So Greg mentions the Russia-Ukraine war, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, and the extreme tensions between the US and China. It all adds up to a world where shipping routes are more inefficient. That's good news for rates for now, but there are major risks, according to speakers at the Capital Link New York Maritime Forum. I'm going to be doing a whole separate video on this because I think Greg hits on a key thing. What we're seeing is the bifurcation of global shipping into two elements. But the one we're talking about here right now is the Russians and the creation of this new LNG fleet. This other article by Malt Humpert, mounting evidence shows Russia assembling pieces for a potential LNG dark fleet. An increasing number of ship-to-ship transfers at the country's Kildin anchorage, a record amount of Arctic permits for LNG carriers, and recent activity on the new build and second-hand market supports speculation by industry insiders of an impending dark fleet on the LNG side, with the country's largest and latest LNG project, Arctic LNG 2, under sanctions by the United States, the European Union, and United Kingdom. Previous story goes on. At this time, it looks like they're still in the doldrums, says Eklund Energy founder Kjell Eklund. There are 1 million cubic meters of floating unsold LNG there. Most of the cargoes have gone through some sort of ship-to-ship transfer. Goes on, with winter fast approaching, the shadow fleet situation will not improve anytime soon. Sea ice has returned, so Novichok faces the dilemma already. As I have said since December last year, Novichok should mothball the plant, but the question is when Putin also finally recognizes there's no way out of this. Nearly a dozen LNG ships have been holding position outside of Ob Bay and further west in the Barents Sea. They include 3 of the North Series new build carriers as well as a host of other LNG carriers. Some of the vessels have not been formally linked to the shadow fleet or have been sanctioned and may continue legitimate transport for the unsanctioned Yamal LNG project. The key for continued production at Arctic LNG 2 will be Russia's ability to find off-takers. Thus far, Asia-Pacific buyers have hesitated to touch Russian spot cargoes. However, sharply rising LNG supply in the coming years will further complicate the equation. This is likely to push prices down, reducing the need for Russian cargoes and making it harder for Novichok to compete. Now, that doesn't mean the Russians are giving up. Matter of fact, they're going a little crazy here. Story over in Reuters. Russia has a crazy plan to use nuclear-powered submarines to transport Arctic LNG. Yeah, that's right. Submarines. So, cargo submarines are not unusual. Back in World War I, we saw the Deutschland and the Bremen coming over to the United States. The Deutschland did it in 1916. The Bremen didn't quite make it. We saw cargo submarines during World War II. The Germans and the Japanese did this. They are extremely inefficient. However, these are the Russians. They'll do some crazy things. Russia has begun designing nuclear-powered submarines to export liquefied natural gas from the Arctic to Asia to try to nearly halve the journey time along the Northern Sea route. Russia already uses nuclear-powered icebreakers to pave the way for much transport. But Russia is suffering from a shortage of vessels able to battle thick Arctic ice, an obstacle for its new Arctic LNG 2 project. Mikhail Kolchuk, a close associate of President Vladimir Putin and director of the Khrushchev Institute, Russia's leading nuclear research facility, presented the submarine project at an industry conference in St. Petersburg last week. This is about the creation of a fundamentally new class of vessel capable of becoming an alternative to traditional gas carriers, which in Arctic conditions are unable to navigate all year without icebreaker escort. Okay, on the plus side, this is an extremely green method to haul LNG. You're not emitting any emissions of any kind. On the second case, this is a Russian nuclear submarine, and they don't have the best track record for anything going out. Well, no worries here, because we have another alternative out here. This story also over at G Captain. Chinese vessels without ice class violate Arctic safety rules, struggling through ice to deliver sanctioned cargo. In an attempt to deliver a power plant to a Russian Arctic LNG project before winter, 2 Chinese heavy lift vessels are inching along toward the increasing sea ice on the northern sea route. A recent storm in the Bering Sea delayed both vessels by several days, allowing more ice to form. The 2 vessels, the Ocean 28 and Nanfeng Zhizheng, are traveling through broken first-year ice between 10 to 30 centimeters thick. Only the latter has ice classification. The 2 Chinese heavy lift vessels have at least another 2 weeks to go en route to the Arctic LNG 2 project on the Gidam Peninsula. Even more challenging ice conditions await in the Vixky Strait, around 1,500 nautical miles further west. Here, sea ice has begun to choke the narrow strait, with wind potentially pushing thicker multi-year ice into the shipping lanes. What the Russians are doing in the Arctic is worth people's attention. There is a lot going on here, and I'm not exactly sure why it doesn't garner more attention than we think. At the same time, over on the U.S. side, U.S. Arctic President falters as Nome Deepwater port solicitation canceled. Efforts to expand U.S. Arctic capabilities face another setback. The long-discussed expansion of the port of Nome to create the country's first Arctic deepwater port faces undetermined delays following the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' cancellation of solicitations due to cost overruns. The expansion of the port of Nome to become U.S. sole Arctic deepwater port has been discussed for more than a decade. The $662 million project secured federal and state funding earlier this year, led to the signing of a project partnership agreement between Nome and the Army Corps of Engineers. The majority of the cost, about 90%, will be carried by the Army Corps, with the city of Nome covering the remaining 10%. The awarding of funding was seen as a major step to expanding U.S. presence in the region. A lack of progress toward developing a deepwater port sends exactly the wrong strategic message to U.S. Arctic competitors. With a relatively short construction season during the summer months, Phase 1 is expected to take 3 to 4 years, with full projection completion by 2030. The expansion of the port will allow it to accommodate large cruise and cargo ships, and more importantly, all major U.S. military vessels except aircraft carriers. Nome is a perfect ideal port, either there, Dutch Harbor, in the Aleutian Islands. If you start transiting ships via the Northern Sea Route north of Russia, those are going to be largely ice-strengthened ships. They're going to come down and need a port to offload their cargo onto non-ice-strengthened ships to distribute throughout the Pacific. Nome makes an ideal delivery port for that. It could be a key transit point for that. Unfortunately, this cancellation is going to put it further behind schedule. All right, let's go ahead and look at our second story. Our second story deals with the cruise ship industry, and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have released their inspection reports on cruise vessels. So far, 19 ships have risen to the occasion, earning perfect scores in the CDC's rigorous vessel sanitation program. These vessels are the shining beacons of cleanliness in an industry often shadowed by tales of norovirus outbreaks in less than sterile conditions. A roster of the Immaculate 19 run from the Carnival Spirit all the way down this list down to the Norwegian Gem. These ships have scored a perfect score on the list. After a series of outbreaks of noroviruses before COVID, CDC started doing inspection scores on vessels. And so these inspections really take into effect all the issues associated with them. Now, I should note that while we got top scores, we also got the bottom scores too. And these become the nastiest ships of 2024. At the bottom of the list is the Hanseatic Inspiration with a score of 62. That is quite low. I mean, that is a substantially low level. Next, you jump up quite a bit, up into the 86 range. That would be the Kindon, the Evrima, the Caribbean Princess, Carnival, Breeze, and MSC Magnifica. And then still scoring under the 80s, you have these vessels. But I think it's really important that the CDC do these inspections. I think it's important that we get a cleanliness score. I don't know about you. In my state, we have inspections before you go in and eat at a restaurant. So I'm always looking for that A. I want an A. I really don't want to go eat at a place with a C. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to our next story. Story number 3 takes us off the coast of California and the U.S. Navy demonstrating a game-changing underway reload technology that could redefine naval warfare, according to Mike Schuller over at G-Captain. The U.S. Navy has achieved a significant breakthrough in maritime combat readiness to successfully demonstrating the transferable reload at sea method, or TRAM. It is the military. We have to have an acronym. On a warship in open waters for the first time. The innovative technology allows warships to rearm their missile systems while at sea, drastically reducing downtime and enhancing operational effectiveness. The historic demonstration took place on October 11th off the coast of San Diego, where sailors aboard the Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Chosin used the hydraulically powered TRAM device to load an empty missile canister into the ship's Mark 41 vertical launch system. Now, while this is being called a innovative technology, can I be clear? This technology has been around since 1988. It's just we got rid of it after the Cold War. We felt like we didn't need to be able to reload vertical launch cells. VLS are those tubes mounted in U.S. warships from which missiles fly out of. They went from the launching arms to the VLS cells because of the threat posed by mass Soviet weapons. If you get out your copy of Red Storm Rising, you will see that we talk about things like backfire bombers and AS-4 kitchens, and you would have to deal with hundreds of these missiles coming in. The old twin-arm launchers couldn't launch missiles fast enough, so we went with VLS, vertical launch systems tubes. And so you can dump dozens of missiles out within a minute. That works great. The problem is you can't reload them. We developed a method to reload them at sea, but the method, I gotta say, is a bit clunky. The problem is the VLS tube has to be physically removed. You don't just move the missile, you gotta move the whole tube. So you gotta first take the tube out, you have to stow it aside, and then you have to transfer fully loaded tubes over to the vessel, and then you have to build this massive crane here that can lower the tube down into the launcher, and there's very little parameters there for the tube to move. And so you really take very calm seas to do this, and it is an excruciatingly slow reload time. It takes a long time to do this. Now, this transfer, I should note, was of a VLS tube. There was no missile in it, so it was empty at the time they did it. But it is the first success that they had. Typically, you have to take these vessels into port. So, for example, over in the Red Sea, when the U.S. destroyers were shooting missiles off, they had to go into port, Manama over in Bahrain, or into Yanbu over in Saudi Arabia, or all the way back to Rota in Spain to reload. There's an argument that the Houthis say that they ran out of missiles and left. That's not true. When warships get low at a certain point, they're going to go reload, and that's what they did. This will allow you to reload. The problem with this is it's very slow. You need very calm water to do it. And it takes up a lot of room, not just on the warship. You lose missile cells because you got to mount this huge, massive crane, but you also lose a lot of space on your AKEs, your supply ships, because big VLS cells are really big. And as a matter of fact, I am not sure how much room they actually take up on board the vessels. So that when you do these reloads, not exactly sure if you're going to be able to carry this. Oh, I should also note that they're doing this reload on board a Ticonderoga-class cruiser. They are about to go away. We're losing the Ticonderogas. So this to work, it has to work on a Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Go ahead and over to our next story. This story comes to us from Georgia. 7 dead after crowded ferry gangway collapses in Georgia. Gangway to a state-run ferry on Georgia's Sapelo Island collapsed on Sunday, plunging at least 20 people into the water. 7 fatalities have been confirmed with multiple injuries reported. Tragedy sent shockwaves through the close-knit island community and beyond. Georgia's Department of Natural Resources, which operate the ferry and the landing dock, mobilized a search and rescue operation and are coordinating efforts with a multitude of people in the area. Investigation into the cause is underway. Early reports indicate the gangway was last inspected in December 2023 by Crescent Equipment Company with no issues detected. The Sapelo Island Ferry, which has temporarily halted operations, was expected to resume service on Monday. This is obviously a massive tragedy that's happened out there, and unfortunately we do see this happen at times on docks in the area. There is a lot of very kind of important infrastructure that doesn't get the attention it needs, and it is allowed, unfortunately, to get into disrepair. If you want to follow this story, I am not following this story as closely, but a good friend of our channel, Cat Mandy, down on the Menorcan Mullet, is following it. He's got a whole series of videos he has done on this, including a discussion about the collapse on the press conference that was held down there. And matter of fact, he went down and looked at a dock very similar to that that's happening. He's also tracking the voyage of the motor vessel Dolly as it set sail from the United States heading back to China. So if you want to get the update on this, I recommend heading on over to Menorcan Mullet. Cat Mandy is doing excellent, as he always does. Provides great information. Always recommend Cat Mandy as a great source. All right, let's go ahead and jump to our last story of the day. Last story takes us off the coast of Bangladesh. An LPG tanker explodes, one linked to Iranian gas smuggling. In a dramatic scene off the coast of Bangladesh, 2 liquefied petroleum gas carriers erupted in flames during a cargo transshipment operation on Sunday. So here's the video I have on the event. The vessel on the right, that is the LPG Sophia, built in 1997, a 6,500 CBM fully pressurized gas carrier. The vessel on the left, from which they're filming this, is the Captain Nicholas, built in 1992. It's a very large gas carrier, 78,500 CBM. I'm going to go ahead and let this play. Fortunately, injuries were averted thanks to quick intervention by the Bangladesh Navy and Coast Guard, but the incident has once again shined a spotlight on the murky and safety operational standards of vessels involved in transporting sanctioned oil and gas. What you see here is the LPG Sophia, the bow, the very front part of the vessel furthest away from you, is drifting away from the Captain Nicholas. Not sure why. The vessel is in the process of transferring fuel over. They're transferring liquefied petroleum gas over. Here you see the vessel actually backing down here, coming back down, and you'll start to see right here the hose. This large area here is the segment of the hose. You can hear lines starting to snap, and you see the tension mounting in the hose line. You're going to see gas start emanating here shortly. I think that is where the manifold is rupturing, and then you will see the entire hose line split. So here you start seeing the gas come out. That is the liquefied petroleum gas, which is turning into a gas. It's no longer a liquid. LPG is a kind of a strange name. There's the split of the line, and now you're getting LPG venting from both carriers until they can shut the line. Sorry for the very good language there in Bangladesh. All this needs is an ignition point, and you get a fire. And that's the fire you see. The report goes on. Reports from the local Bangladeshi media indicate the fire broke out as the 2 vessels were separating after completing a lightering. However, they still had a hose attached, so I'm not exactly sure why they're separating. Senior crew members on board both ships confirmed to authorities that the flames started during the disconnect process. They were not disconnecting. That hose snapped. This video shows you some of the firefighting that went on here in the port. So reports from local Bangladesh media indicate fire broke out as 2 vessels were separating. According to the Bangladesh Coast Guard Eastern Zone, which oversees operations in Chittagong area, the crew aboard Captain Nicholas was able to bring the fire under control before it caused significant damage. However, the situation was dire on the BLPG Sophia, where all 18 crew members, along with the mooring gangs and security crew, were forced to abandon ship. They were later rescued by a nearby tugboat. Some more video of the event. Thankfully, no casualties were reported, but by Sunday afternoon, the fire on the BLGB Sophia had been extinguished. The ship has been since moved to a safe anchorage for further inspection. The Captain Nicholas, a Cook Island flag vessel owned by Panama-registered Fulgranos Maritime, is managed by the Aspero Ship Management operating from the UAE. Aspero faces accusations from the American watchdog group United Against Nuclear Iran of transporting sanctioned Iranian LPG, which the company denies. This isn't the first time the Captain Nicholas has been at the center of controversy. In June, the ship's crew was abandoned in Shiraz, with 25 crew members, including 18 Ukrainians, left unpaid for 3 months. The B's LPG Sophia, meanwhile, is registered with Atlantis Gas DMCC, a Dubai-based entity, and managed by a small company out of Singapore. However, Tradewinds reports that the listed address for Neptune leads to a ship chandler, raising questions about the true nature of the company's operation. Adding another layer, the Captain Nicholas has been accused by the LPG Operating Association of Bangladesh of misreporting the cargo's country of origin. They claim the vessel was transporting Iranian LPG disguised as another nation's product, a charge that has stirred controversy within the local shipping community. So 5 videos, a lot of gas in the videos. I apologize. I am feeling a little sick. But a lot of gas stories in here. Obviously, crucially important. I think the sanction against the Arctic LNG 2 facility is leading Russia to take risks associated with the transportation of LNG, as we're seeing with the movement of cargo in and out of the area and the use of non-ice strengthened vessels in the area. Obviously, the fact that the U.S. is not building a facility in Nome is a real loss. I think we need to be looking at port infrastructure in this country, and the development of a port like Nome is really key, or else we're going to allow Russia or some other country to develop a port in which ships are going to come into. I think it's better to be in the U.S. That's just me. But that is an issue. Ratings out by the CDC. I think that's always important to have good inspections out there. Obviously, the Navy is working to enhance their ability to project power, doing a whole video here coming up on the issue of freedom of the seas and the Navy's ability and inability to really protect the freedom of the seas. And a lot of that has nothing to do with the Navy. It has a lot to do with the decision by the administration whether or not to do it. Obviously, we see tragedies and accidents, both down in Georgia with the ferry and 7 dead down there, and then the fire on board the vessels in Chittagong in Bangladesh. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Sorry for the little short video today. Not quite as long as our normal What the Ships, but getting over a cold. So hopefully it'll be back up and running full speed in no time at all. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.